Today at the National Press Club, the Australian Tax Office's Commissioner of Taxation, Chris Jordan. Commissioner Jordan, who has worked across the public and private sectors, will discuss transformation, trust and tax. Chris Jordan with today's National Press Club address.
Hello and welcome to the National Press Club of Australia for today's Westpac address. My name is David Crowe. I'm the Chief Political Correspondent at the Sydney Morning Herald and the Age of Melbourne and a Director here at the Club. Our guest today is Chris Jordan, the Commissioner at the Australian Tax Office and the nation's top authority on tax for more than a decade. Tax could not be more topical right now, whether the debate is around reforming the system, improving the way it's collected, stamping out evasion or punishing those who do not pay their fair share. Mr Jordan is at the centre of that debate. But he's not at the centre of that debate for much longer. His term expires on February 29, which is about a week away, so this is his last address to the National Press Club in his role as Commissioner of Taxation. And we hope that means he can be even more frank with his views. Mr Jordan has about 40 years of experience in tax, starting with years of work at Arthur Andersen, sometime as a senior lecturer, and then at KPMG. He joined the ATO as Commissioner on 1 January 2013, more than 11 years ago, and so he's seen his fair share of debate and controversy since then. For those of you watching at home, you can join the conversation on Twitter, where our handle is @PressClubAust, or you can use the hashtag NPC. Please welcome Chris Jordan to the podium.
Well, good afternoon, and it really is a pleasure to be here this afternoon. Although, coming back to your point, David, I do approach this speech with some trepidation, because the last time I spoke here, 7 years ago, I was sued for defamation. So I'm not sure how much more frank I can be, because I don't want to go through that again, especially my last week of being in office. And look, I can't even really tell you much about what happened there, because I wanted to go into a bit of the background there, but the lawyer said all I should do is simply refer you to Justice White's judgment in the federal court. And I was also going to do what I thought would be a humorous line here about some of the other challenges I've faced in my 11 years as Tax Commissioner. Things like the death threats, defending allegations of contempt of the Senate to avoid jail time, Paul Hogan calling me a buffhead on national TV, all those sort of things. But apparently even that can be considered too forthright and risky for a tax commissioner to say. Now just imagine being sued for defamation, for giving away too much information, and censored by the Senate for not giving enough. It's a constant balance. But as my partner, a journalist, as you just heard, who often reminds me in a very forthright way, those of you who are journalists that know her would understand that, very forthright way, she reminds me, well, you're the Tax Commissioner. What do you expect? Well, none of us knew what to expect when I took this job in 2013. I was the first outsider to ever run the tax office. It was considered quite radical when former Treasurer Wayne Swan appointed me, not just because, as he said, who better to run the tax office than a 6'6" ex-copper? Well, I also think it was the fact I was not a career public servant and I lived and stayed based outside the Canberra bubble. Apologies to all of you that are in that area. But because I stayed outside that, I think it really did allow me to radically transform and modernise the ATO over the past decade. Of course, I did it with a lot of help from a fantastic team. we all had the goal of making the system better for everyone, better for our 20,000 employees. In the recent APS census, 79% of our people would recommend the ATO as a good place to work. Now, that's much higher than any other large agency in the public service and much higher than the APS average. And better for the more than 13 million taxpayers there are. In a 2022 survey of 12,000 Australians by the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, the ATO was named as the most trusted federal agency in the Commonwealth. 81% of people trusted us. Now, that's pretty good. I go on about trust a lot and confidence, so I'd hope that we scored well on that trust score. But interestingly, we also had the highest satisfaction rating at 82%. Now, get this. 82% of people that had interactions with us were satisfied, and we were rated the highest of any APS agencies. And we're the ones that take money from people. The ones that dish it out were down the other end of the scale. And we've even made it better for the international tax system. Our results have not just been transformative here in Australia, but globally the ATO is recognised for leading the way, especially when it comes to dealing with multinational tax avoidance. The resource and tech giants are now paying billions more tax overseas and here, some for the first time ever. After the Panama Papers dropped, it was Australia who encouraged countries to act quickly and more collaboratively. And this has permanently transformed international tax cooperation. And key to all this has been the digital revolution within the ATO. And I just want to give a bit of a comparison to show how far we've come. Now, everyone's heard of the United States Internal Revenue Service, the IRS. But what you probably don't know is that they still process tax returns by paper. Picture this, billions of pages of paper stored in enormous warehouses around their country. In a recent CNN report, they talked about this manual processing involving steps like removing paper clips and staples. And another step involves manually entering each digit from the form into the system and then restapling it all back together. Now, finally, I understand they're just starting to use high-speed scanning equipment with some new funding they've been provided. Now, compare this with Australia. Our online tax return lodgement service for individuals is a great example. In 2013, 2.7 million people lodged online through eTax, which was the predecessor to our current service, MyTax. Now, you fast forward to now, 2023, last financial year, this has more than doubled to 5.5 million. And it now takes around half of all the taxpayers, 13 million, the 5.5 million that lodge this through the system, it takes less than 15 minutes to prepare and lodge their tax return. And that's without a stapler inside. Now, if you consider what I've just described and how tax returns in Australia are processed in 2024, you can see why the ATO is in demand as a source of advice globally. Now, looking back, my journey has certainly been less than traditional. I briefly kicked off my career in the police force before switching to degrees in law and commerce. As mentioned, I worked at accounting firm Arthur Andersen, then spent a bit of time in academia at the University of Technology, Sydney, before joining KPMG in the 1980s until where I stayed until the mid-2012. Along the way, I was an advisor to both Labor and coalition governments. Now, having roles in the private and public sector prepared me for leading the ATO, especially an ATO better attuned to the community's needs. Certainly a job I had never envisaged, though I must admit I was really surprised, as anyone could be, that I did actually end up here as Commissioner. So when the former Secretary to the Treasury, Martin Parkinson, approached me on behalf of Treasurer Swan about becoming the Commissioner of Taxation, initially I just laughed. But obviously I took it seriously in the end, and I knew it wouldn't always be smooth sailing. The brief was to make real change to the ATO, to make it less rigid and isolated, and much more in touch with the community's needs and expectations, to focus on helping people get it right, not just catching people who did the wrong thing. Now, I think my private sector experience probably did give me a bit of a hands-on understanding about how difficult the ATO could be to deal with, especially when their focus seemed to be on process rather than outcomes. And I remember within months of commencing and speaking with some graduates that I used to like to sit with, I discovered our people were just bogged down in outdated and redundant manuals, overly bureaucratic processes, which I think really in turn negatively impacted the way they dealt with our clients. So the client experience had a negative implication due to the extraordinary processes and outdated manuals that we had. A couple of examples. There was a practice statement to tell you how to apply sunscreen. And it said that you should use about approximately 1 teaspoon per exposed limb. Apparently, when GST came in and people had to walk down the street and visit small businesses, knock on the door, I'm from the tax office, I'm here to help, maybe someone thought they had to tell them not to get sunburned. Also, and this was a beauty, there was one about how to drive a car. And the line I particularly remember about this one is, if you're driving along the road and you come across a bushfire, try to do a U-turn. Now that's value-add advice, right? Value-add advice. And these folders were given to our graduates when they started. Read these corporate practice management statements. In all seriousness, can you imagine what sort of culture this was creating? So I started by removing 3,000 pages of these pointless instructions for our people. Because my mission was to transform the organisation, and I had a mandate from the government to do so. And this marked really the beginning of our reinvention journey. And I remember pondering the enormity of the task ahead, which I suppose wasn't really helped by comments from friends at weekend barbecues and dinners. They'd say, it's a huge ship, they warned me. You'll struggle to turn it around, let alone keep it afloat. Are you crazy? So in moments of uncertainty, I reminded myself of what I actually had control over, my leadership style. And my main message to our people was to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. And over the years, I've also relied on this approach when partnering with the tax profession to solve irritants and deliver the best possible outcomes for them. Now, a decade later, I can confidently say the ATO has made significant progress towards our vision of being a leading tax, super and registry administrator, recognised for our contemporary service, expertise and integrity. How? By emphasising and prioritising a culture where we don't and won't accept the status quo. We've successfully charted a massive program of transformation. We did it all in a deliberate and considered way, and we did it all ourselves. without paying millions to consultants, with apologies to the consultants that are here today. But over the last 11 years, we have demonstrably improved the client and staff experience, made it easier to comply and harder not to. We've cut red tape and we've modernised our administration of the tax system as part of the digital revolution to make tax just happen. All while operating in a rapidly changing environment. Now, unfortunately, post-COVID, we've seen a rise in fraud and debt. Increasing safeguards and resetting our debt collection approach are not always popular decisions. However, I am unapologetic about our focus. We have a job to do. And I'll put this to you. When you pay GST to a store, or you see tax taken out of your payslip, you would rightfully expect that this is being paid on to the ATO. Likewise, you would expect your super has been paid to your super fund. Now, some businesses are telling us on BAS forms, etc., that they've collected the GST, they've withheld the tax from your wages, and they've promised to pay the super, but they've never actually paid it on to us. Now, we cannot allow that to stand, especially the super for employees. I think you and the community would agree that we cannot allow people to live off money that's just not theirs. Meanwhile, the risk of sophisticated fraud attempts through the increase in enormous data theft will only continue to grow. We are working to harden our own systems and are putting measures in place to help people protect themselves. I've been asked many times, what keeps you awake at night? And my response has always been cyber security. We hold about 50 petabytes of data. Now, to put that into context, that's equivalent to 1 billion tall filing cabinets. 1 billion tall filing cabinets. Now, our Security Operations Centre and Advanced Systems Monitor, they do detect and respond to cyber threats that face us at the ATO. On average, we defend against 4.7 million attempted cyber attacks each month. 4.7 million attempted intrusions each month that target our websites, our services, and our infrastructure. And while we navigate these challenges, we have to keep pace with technology while continuing to innovate and expand our use of data to drive digitalisation. However, I'm not under any illusions the ATO of 2024 is perfect. In 2017, I shared my intentions in this room of making a good system better. It wasn't about some silver bullet or simplistic reform, but about significant reforms to make our system and administration stronger, fairer, and more contemporary. As opposed to when I first started, where people told me I was faced with an impossible task, I now hear stories about the relative ease of interacting with us and the community's trust and confidence in our professionalism, reliability, and fairness. It really is refreshing and reassuring. Now, meanwhile, importantly, the ATO now looks outside the APS when assessing our own performance. Because I see a future where the ATO is considered the best when compared with any organisation interacting with a large and diverse client base anywhere in the world. I recently dusted off the ATO annual report from 2013, and over the last 10 years, much has changed. The number of small businesses has increased from 2.5 million to 4.6 million. The gig economy has created whole new sets of small businesses, such as rideshare drivers, social media influencers, that carry with them whole new concepts of what a small business is. And also the number of wage and salary earners who are also deriving income from a business, side hustles, has increased as well. The sharing economy reporting regime is a new reporting requirement for sharing economy platforms. The data collected will help us assist taxpayers to know, comply with and pay their tax obligations, levelling the playing field. A couple of months ago, we launched our refreshed website, enhancing the navigation and improving the search functions. Now, to give you a sense of the scale, ato.gov.au is one of the largest and most accessed government websites in Australia. It has over 40,000 pages and over 115 million visitors annually. The Mandarin reported, and I think they're represented here today, we updated our website and no one really noticed. Now that's a good thing. My favourite quote from that story was, any major government customer-facing website that can flip its entire content management system without significant initial blowback puts similar corporate overhauls in the shade. So I'm very proud that we at the ATO have the capacity and the capability to do such significant things and so well compared to the private sector or anyone else. Now, looking at our core function of collecting the revenue that all Australians rely on, since 2013 we've reduced the cost of collecting every $100 of tax from 91 cents to 54 cents. So in the 10 years we've reduced the cost of collection from 91 cents to 54 cents for every $100 that we collect. But what hasn't changed over the years is our commitment to build community confidence by improving tax performance. Making sure the largest taxpayers in Australia pay their fair share is a great place to start. Now, when I said enough is enough in my Senate estimates opening statement in 2016, I meant it. I said we would not be stooged by multinationals, and we now have the capability to go toe-to-toe with the best advisors in the world. Now, the same year we established our Tax Avoidance Task Force, which has secured around $30 billion in additional tax revenue from multinational, large public and large private businesses. Now, more importantly, we've locked in future tax performance by requiring companies to agree to the tax treatment of their operations. Apple, BHP, Chevron, Facebook, Google, Microsoft, ResMed and Rio Tinto have all publicly acknowledged finalising disputes with the ATO. These are landmark victories. The size of these successes for the benefit of all Australians are without precedent in the history of the ATO. And our efforts are paying off. During my tenure, I've witnessed a considerable shift in the attitude and behaviour of multinationals and large corporates. Our world-leading assurance program that has been developed and run by Second Commissioner Jeremy Hershorn, who's here today, have fundamentally changed tax-paying behaviour. More and more companies are improving their tax compliance and governance arrangements, with being a good taxpayer increasingly a key aspect of their social licence to operate in Australia. Now, we use tax gaps to draw insights into tax-paying behaviour. Tax gaps estimate the difference between what the ATO expects to collect and the amount that would have been collected if every taxpayer was fully compliant with the law. Now, the tax gaps act as our annual health check. No other country publishes such comprehensive estimates. Our latest estimates prove that when larger taxpayers do the right thing, it positively influences others. Now, a 1% overall reduction in tax gaps may not sound like much, but it reflects more than $5 billion in tax per year available extra to support the Australian community. Looking at the tax gap figures for large corporate groups, we are operating at 93% willing tax performance, with 96% after compliance intervention, which is world leading. The reality is no tax system has or ever will have zero gaps. It's our role at the ATO to keep chipping away at them, with even small gains delivering large value for the community. Our tax performance program has really helped us move away from a gotcha mentality to a preventative mindset, shifting our focus away from audit yields to improving tax performance. This sets us up and sets us up and apart as a leading tax administrator globally and shapes our future approaches. Today, we're announcing at the Self-Managed Super Fund Association National Conference for the first time the estimated size, scale and trajectory of the illegal early access of funds from self-managed super fund accounts. In 2020, over $380 million was illegally accessed from SMSFs and $255 million in 2021. Now, this clearly needs to stop. Super is for retirement. So if people are experiencing genuine hardship, there are rules in place for when you can legally access super to help. And I want to make this really clear. We don't set and forget when it comes to managing compliance. From multinational tax avoidance to self-managed super fund trickery, we try to be ahead of the game. Our journey is far from over, and I'm confident I'm leaving the ATO with strong foundations built through contemporary service, expertise and integrity. The next part of the ATO's journey will include being fully digitalised by 2030. This means we'll offer real-time tax reporting and payment information, where data will flow from taxpayers' natural systems to ours without any extra effort or intervention from them. We know the community expects all taxpayers to pay the right amount on time, and we know the majority do. That's why we put so much effort into making it easier for people who do the right thing and harder for those that don't. So looking further afield, unlike many revenue authorities around the world, we do not have criminal investigation powers. This means we rely on others, such as the Australian Federal Police, to be able to do our job. Now, unfortunately, this also means we have to get in line with their priorities. And I would like to see more alignment with our counterparts across the world. The majority of revenue agencies, including France, Germany, New Zealand, the UK, and even our mates in the IRS with their staplers, are authorised to obtain third-party documentary information and conduct searches to obtain necessary evidence. So there is always more work to do, and as I stand before you reflecting on my time at the ATO, the words transformation and trust echo in my mind. And nothing encapsulates the essence of that better than in March 2020. That was when everyone was in lockdown. I was the only one driving across the deserted Sydney Harbour Bridge on a Sunday night through empty streets, not another car on the whole of the Sydney Harbour Bridge, for a meeting. The meeting was about the multi-million participant, multi-billion dollar pandemic projects, JobKeeper, cash flow boost and early release of super. That night, the Expenditure Review Committee wanted immediate assurance the ATO could deliver what was required within 6 weeks. Now, with trust in our people and trust in my CIO, Ramez Kaft, who is sitting here today, I fronted up to that strange meeting and confidently and certainly somewhat nervously stated, yes, we can. The government entrusted us to deliver vital stimulus to Australians, and this wouldn't have been possible without immediately and almost overnight redeploying 5,000 of our people from their usual roles to deliver $164 billion in financial support for when they needed it most for Australians. I know I bang on about trust, but it really has underpinned our transformation. Trust from government, trust from the community, trust from tax professionals, and trust from our people. So it has been a privilege to lead a workforce of 20,000 people, motivated and diverse people who achieve excellence daily, and to serve a community that relies on our commitment to excellence. So, here's to the transformation, the trust, and the ever-evolving story of tax. We're in this together for the benefit of all Australians. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that speech. We'll go to questions from the journalists here in a moment. I'll take the liberty of asking them first, but I'll first say that you had me intrigued with your opening to the speech when you talked about the defamation action. I was worried for a minute about what might be coming our way, but I thought the audience might be glad to hear that a jailed accountant failed in their defamation lawsuit against you in 2021, which is good to know. So, as I said, feel free to be frank.
Well, what I will say is I have a lot more sympathy for your profession of journalism.
That's good to hear.
About Australia's defamation laws. But I'm told by my people, do not say anything more. Okay.
We'll move on. But there is one issue that's been making headlines in recent weeks. It's the story about fraud, basically. It's about the so-called TikTok fraud. It's about the loss of $2 billion in taxpayer funds through these fraudulent claims that were put in using an approach basically that was shared on social media. And unfortunately, it looks like there were 150 staff members at the ATO who were implicated, who were connected to this in some way. And so I thought, you spoke in your address about culture. Here's a question about culture, because clearly there's a problem. I think a lot of Australians watching at home or watching the ATO from a distance would think if there are 150 staff members implicated in some way, they would want to be sure that the ATO is throwing the book at those staff members. Now, what can we expect your successor to do, or what do you think your successor should do in this situation? Because should some of those staff members be going to jail?
Well, there are already some people that committed the fraud under the Project Potato that are in jail. I just need to clarify the 150, though. They represent that number. We did a scan of about 60,000 people over the last 5 years who had either worked for or were a contractor to the ATO. And that could include people in outsourced contact centres, etc. Anyone that had a user access number. So out of that 60,000 over a 5-year period, 150 had the indicators of the GST fraud. Of that 150, 12 were current contractors or employee at the time they did the fraud, of which 3 were current ATO employees and 9 were contractors. So it is totally unacceptable to have even 3. Clearly they're terminated and compliance actions have been taken. 57,000 people attempted this fraud. Unheard of. Now, you might say, well, how come it sort of got away from you? Our systems were never designed for people to commit fraud at such scale in such short period in their own names, right? So they were real people with real addresses, real tax file numbers, real bank accounts. And it just went off on social media, on TikTok, people advertising. And clearly some were advertising and getting a commission for the money that other people gave. But you never really thought 57,000 people would commit a fraud in their own name and their own address. It's bizarre. So it really shocked us that the community could have such an appetite to commit fraud and take money from government in that way. Now, we fall over backwards to help small business normally. I see Peter Strong, the former head of COSBOA, and I understand now a budding politician here in the ACT up there, and as he would know, we really try to make things as easy as possible for small businesses, and that includes registering for an ABN and registering for GST. Now, unfortunately, this has resulted in more grittiness having to be put into the system. It will be slower and potentially more difficult for people to get GST registration in particular. We were swamped. It was terrible. It was appalling when I found out there were any ATO employees, let alone 3 current ones. As I said, a number were contractors in contact centres that had access rights. So that was the 150 people. But I absolutely agree. And it's going to get worse. Right?
You think there'll be more of them? Scams like
Not like that one, because that was just bizarre, you know, to have people in their own names, and our systems are tighter. What I'm concerned about more so is identity fraud and identity theft. This was not identity theft. There was a little bit of that in the Protego GST fraud. And identity theft's been around for ages. Remember, people would, you know, steal a utility bill or your Medicare card out of your letterbox as part of getting the points for licences and that sort of things. So what is of concern to me now is what I refer to as the industrialisation of identity theft through large-scale cyber breaches. So you look at the Medibank, Optus, the pool of information they have on people that can be used to create an identity of someone that's not that person using it is enormous. Now, we came across something recently. It's that large now that, again, super funds are like us. They try to help and make it easy for people to join them, etc. There was a situation recently where 30,000 new super funds were created in a very short period of time. And again, using information from the dark web that they'd received from these big data breaches. But the curious bit of this was they were using bots. Don't ask them to explain exactly what they are, but it's an automated way of filling out a form. So the criminals couldn't fill out the forms to create the new super funds quick enough, so they devised a bot to do that work for them. Now, this is scary stuff, right? This is things that we really have to keep on top of. We really have to keep investing in. We have to keep convincing government that this is something that continuous funding will be required. The criminals are smart, but we've just got to keep ahead. So the Protego, I hope, was this bizarre one-off. We are taking compliance action against 57,000 people, but it's a long haul. We prioritised prosecutions of some, and they're in jail because of the ones that promoted it more so. But yes, it was a pretty ordinary situation.
Yeah. Our next question is from Tom McElroy.
Commissioner, thank you for taking our questions. Thank you for your speech. For many people, your tenure in office will forever be linked with the PwC tax links saga. You've said previously that the Big Four partnerships are effectively unregulated. Is it time for a standalone regulator to oversee their activities? What kind of form would you see that taking? And should the size of the Big Four partnerships be brought down from about 1,000 now, perhaps closer to law firms, 400 or so, to improve the system?
Look, it really is a matter for government to look at these. I mean, the regulation of partnerships actually sits with the states, by the way, as well. And I don't think it's up to government or regulators to determine the size of private enterprises, you know, the partnerships. I don't think people ever thought years ago that there'd be partnerships of nearly 1,000 partners, that they would be doing work across such an extremely broad area now in the consulting, you know, way beyond the traditional audit and tax work, way beyond all of that. So I think the PwC issue has really shone a light on, you know, what should be the government's governance arrangements, what should be the regulatory function. As you know, Joe Longo from ASIC recently said, well, they can only look at a sliver of that. We can only really look at the individual partners as taxpayers. So it is worth a discussion on. I'm not sure a standalone regulator is the answer to that, but it is certainly worthwhile investing time and effort to see what is possible. Other countries have clearly looked at this and they've got rotation of auditors, very clear rules around what auditors can and can't, what sort of work they can and can't do for their clients. But it's a matter for government, it's a matter for the states, and I think it's worth investing to see what should be a fit and proper governance situation going forward.
Thank you. The next question is from Patrick Commons.
Patrick Commons from the Australian newspaper. Congratulations on 10 years in the top job, Commissioner. Now, there's a view that we have quite a high marginal personal tax rate and that it kicks in at a relatively low level. Do you agree with that view, and does this configuration tend towards tax planning, tax minimisation for higher earners?
Well, that's a real big P policy issue. And I'm not sure Stephen Kennedy, as Secretary of Treasury, would like to come up here and help me out on this, but it is a forever debate. And it's something that, you know, I can't really comment on. It has been written, though, as you alluded to, that with the sort of personal rates we have, people do focus on what they can do to split income and try to get it taxed at the corporate rate rather than the individual rate. And that has required us to really focus a lot on what's appropriate now and what is within the law. You see, we can't change the law, but we've got to make sure people apply what they think is a proper application of the law is in fact that. But people will try, you know, to split their income. Some have that opportunity, like small businesses and that. They can operate in trusts and partnerships, etc. It's not just the big partnerships. I presume most of us in this room, like me, just get the money taken out of your salary. But, you know, countries like New Zealand took some pretty drastic steps that I think would be difficult here. They abolished all work-related expenses, all of them. And they reduced their top marginal rate to 30%. I think they've since put it up. But Australians love their work-related expense deductions. They love them. And that would be a big step. It would help simplify the system. It would help us be able to push returns to people more, because we have dividend income, interest income, medical sort of expenses, managed investment trusts. We've got all that, but we don't have work-related expenses. So it does complicate the system a little bit more.
Our next question is from Deborah Nesbitt.
Hi, thank you for taking your questions. I work for Bloomberg Tax. I've got a fairly technical question. I'm wondering what your view generally, first of all, is of the OECD project to get multinationals to pay their fair share of tax, the BEPS project in the countries they work in. But also just recently there were some Pillar 1 rules released on transfer pricing methods as it relates to, as I understand, the distribution and marketing of wholesale goods. How important are those rules, the release of that? Do you have any reservations about them? And, what would your advice be to the Australian government for those rules?
Look, I've been fairly closely involved as Vice Chair of the Forum of Tax Administrators, which is about, I think, 50 or so tax authorities, tax commissioners from around the world. So I'm very well aware of what was the base erosion and profit shifting projects that have been looked at and analysed. Again, that's much more a matter of Treasury because they're policy initiatives. However, we at the ATO have been strongly supportive of the OECD in the technical areas as to what this might look like. For us, though, my personal view is it will help a lot of countries that aren't as sophisticated as us. Right? We have been able to do a lot of work and stand head to toe, as I said, with the best advisors in the world. That enough is enough speech. And we've managed to really get pretty good results on the margin that can be taxed here. Other countries that are less sophisticated are very much looking forward and welcoming this Pillar 1 and Pillar 2. But for us, the government has said it supports them. We will implement the legislation that comes through. But we've all those companies I listed, we've done pretty good deals there. That other countries are sort of, wow, how did you do that? And that's why we're seen as a global leader. That's why we do get countries coming out here. How did you manage to do that? And we've offered a lot of help and we've invested a lot in capacity building, not only around the region, because DFAT offers a lot of aid that we provide in the Asia-Pacific area, particularly in PNG, Indonesia, Fiji, Palau for some reason, other places. So we help people understand, and it'll be very useful for those sort of countries to have more straightforward rules. But we've sort of done it over 5, 6, 8 years of really hard slog. Under Jeremy Hershon's leadership, Rebecca Saint, who heads up our public groups and international, and now public groups alone. It's been tough. It's been tough, hard work, but we've got pretty well good results already. So we will participate, we will support, we will implement, but I think it's going to be of greater utility to less sophisticated tax authorities.
Our next question is from Shane Wright.
Commissioner Shane Wright from the SMH and the Age, thanks for your speech. When you took office, about 3/4 of Australians used an accountant to get their personal income tax done. Now it's down around about 65%, even with all the pre-filing and the simplification that you put in place during your tenure. I'm just wondering, how much simpler would a standard deduction system be? What would the ATO need for that to be in place, and what would you see as the benefits of a standard deduction?
Well, as I touched on, in New Zealand, by taking away work-related expenses, it did allow a lot more people to get what's called push returns. My son was doing his apprenticeship in carpentry there, and he showed me, actually, when I was over visiting, look, Dad, here's my tax return they've just sent to me. And it basically said, you'll get a refund of this amount. If you disagree, let us know. Otherwise, it'll be paid into your account in 2 weeks' time or something. I thought, oh, that's pretty good. But Imagine taking away work-related expenses. Standard deductions, there's lots of winners and losers. I only ever seem to have deductions for donations or something, but I don't know how all these large figures seem to float around. So some people will get deductions that they never thought they would. Others will complain because they'll get less deductions. It's really how our returns aren't that difficult now. I don't think we should be focusing all on push deductions, push returns or standard deductions. It's more awareness, you know. I can't believe I go to the hairdresser, I go somewhere, and they talk about, oh, I've got to go to my accountant. I said, well, why do you go to an accountant? Oh, I've got to, you know, deductions are, you know, I use a few little things here from a job. I said, but do you know what they are? Yeah. Are they the same each year? Yeah. I said, well, why don't you use the ATO app and just take a photo of your receipt and put it in My Deductions. They get loaded up into the relevant box at the end of the year. And I hear people still saying, oh, my accountant asked me for bank statements for interest, dividend statements to see what the dividends I get are. What are they asking for that for? We pre-fill your return with that information. They go, really? Well, yes. So I've even get, you know, older people say, oh, my kids said how good this is, this My Tax. I said, why don't you use it? They go, oh, I don't know. I had a secretary of a department say to me recently, I've got to tell you, Chris, I used that My Tax thing. It was incredible. It was so much easier than making an appointment at my accountant, going along with all these pieces of paper and paying $300. It took me about 10 or 15. I couldn't believe all that information was there. I said, well, why don't you tell people that? Right? Why don't all you journalists tell people that? Try it yourself. Get My ATO app. Get your strong MyGov ID. And I see Chris smiling over there from the DTA. You have facial recognition. You're on the app. You can do your tax return. You can take a photo of your deduction. You can upload that in your return. It tells you how much tax has been in it. It's fantastic. And I'll tell you a quick story. I probably shouldn't. The chair of our Audit and Risk Committee, independent chair, I was meeting with in that committee, and he didn't have our app. And so I pulled out my phone. I said, oh, Peter, look, you've got to do this. I looked at it. There it came up. And right on the front screen it said, you have a debt owing of. That's not me. It was that Division 253 super thing. Obviously, it passed me by, but it's fantastic. It's secure, it's facial recognition, and you just take a photo of your deductions and put them there. So we should be focusing on awareness of what we've already got as a first stage in making it easier for people. There is no reason that so many people in Australia, I think the ATO itself caused this problem because they put out what was called TaxPack years ago. And it started out as a little thing, then the lawyers got it. And it became a book. And it was delivered to every household in Australia. And people got this book and thought, gee, this must be hard. My mother-in-law years ago said she went through every page in the tax, which was a secretary. She had no deductions other than union fees, you know. She said, I spent hours going through that. So I think the ATO decades ago made people think it was actually going to be hard because it was like a book delivered to every household.
Next question from Tom Crowley.
Tom Crowley from ABC News. Mr Jordan, thank you for your speech. I want to come back to an issue raised by another Tom earlier, and that is the Big Four consulting firms. Issues relating to the Big Four are being probed at the moment in a Senate inquiry into consulting integrity, and the senators who are running that inquiry have made very clear their view that there is a cosy relationship between the ATO and the Big Four. They'll point to staff members coming and going, to frequent meetings, and also to the presence of Big Four alumni on boards like the Tax Practitioners Board. Is it your view that there is a cosy relationship between the Big Four consulting firms and the ATO, or is it your view that anything needs to change in regards to that relationship?
Well, the way I'd put it is the big four firms don't think they have a cosy relationship with us. They have their arguments. We work with them. We need them in the system, right? They're systemic advisors that are necessary. Tax can be complex in that international cross-border sphere and new complex transactions. I think it's a shame that you might see less willingness of senior private sector people wanting, for all the right reasons, to come and give back and do good things for the public service, usually taking a significant reduction in remuneration. I think you might see that there'll be less interest in that. But you can't just be a closed shop. You know, you can't say, well, you've got to start as a graduate at the ATO and only those that started as graduates come through. Right? I mean, you do need an interchange to have a thriving, stimulating environment. It's good for people of the ATO to go to the private sector and maybe come back. It's good for the private sector people to come and do things. And we get the benefit of knowledge that we might not have happened. The US has done this for decades. You look at their interchange, particularly, say, the securities exchange, you know, the SEC. That's a common thing. You get the best and brightest people coming out of those US universities going to work at some of these government bodies and then going into the private sector. So I don't, you know, this whole cosiness, because you happen to work somewhere once, doesn't mean that forever after you know, love everyone that's ever there who you've probably never met, you know, 99% or so of. So I just reject that as a general notion. I think it's healthy to have an interchange. Other countries seem to do it well. And it's a shame, I think, that you might well see less of it in the future.
Next question is from Sarah Basford-Canales.
Thank you, Commissioner. Sarah Basford-Canales from The Guardian. By the ATO's own admission, Tax Office's campaign to resurrect very old on-hold debts has caused unnecessary distress for older Australians and lower income earners, those most at risk. What has gone wrong with this initiative?
I'd be surprised if I didn't get that question from you, Guardian. Look, for decades we had thresholds in place for low amounts of debt, low-income people, and there was a bucket of debt called uneconomic to pursue. Why spend $200 trying to chase $5? Right? It just didn't make sense. It's been there for decades. When we turned off all of our debt collection, pretty much, during COVID, that couldn't last forever. So when we were turning our debt collection processes and systems back on, the Australian National Audit Office said, well, what are these things here? You know, why are you not collecting these uneconomic to pursue amounts? And there were some thresholds, as I said, low income, small amount of debt, very old, that we just put in a bucket and never sought to collect. If people did get a refund, it would be offset against it. And they said, you're not confirming with the law. They gave us a B finding on our accounts. And we said, but this has worked well for decades. We cannot spend the money to chase 5 cents, $2. It's ridiculous. And they gave us a negative finding on our accounts and said we are not conforming with the law. Now, as a regulator, we can't purposely not conform with law. We have to. So we're working our way through, and we've ceased all that correspondence. Probably wasn't the best example of a project to communicate to people. We were never asking, you know, for the money. It was only if you get a refund, you will now have this small amount going, because the ANAO gave us a negative finding on our annual accounts saying we did not conform with the law. We didn't want to do it. It had no real, you know, exposure at the executive. That everyone knew there was this bucket called uneconomic to pursue, but it turned out that we checked, and yes, that's right. So we have to do something. We're now working our way through what the best thing to do is. People that did pay their debts years ago say, well, how come they got off? Does that mean everyone in future, if I sit out long enough, I won't have to pay? But we have to clean it up, and we have to be better in the future.
I just want to follow up just because the ATO can ask the government for reprieve for those at-risk taxpayers. Why hasn't the ATO asked?
We're in the process of looking at all of the alternatives. One is to go to the Minister of Finance and say, can you write off these billions of dollars of debt, say, before 2017? Again, that sort of is a bit unfair to people that did pay the debts before 2017. That is one of the alternatives. Clean it up and say, going forward, this is not going to happen again, but it would be a significant amount of money, and it's the Minister of Finance that would have to exercise the discretion to write that off. But it is one of the alternatives we're looking at.
Thank you.
Next question from Andrew Brown.
Andrew Brown from AAP Newswire. Thanks so much for your speech, Commissioner. The Prime Minister on radio, following a question from a listener, said that he was hoping to raise the issue of a possible crackdown on short-term holiday rentals like Airbnb and how they are taxed for use. So, like, owners are able to claim deductions for their use throughout the whole year, even though they're only used for a fraction of the time. What changes do you think should be made to that arrangement? And would you anticipate any flow-on effect to the housing market or rental market as a result? And how big a task would this be for your successor?
Look, I'm not qualified to comment on the impact on the housing market, but I can say, as I touched upon in my speech, with all the platform providers, we now get feeds of information. That was a bit of a battle to get agreement, but we now know from places like Airbnb and Uber, etc., who is using their platform for payment. So we can see the income side now. We're also working on data acquisition and absorption into our system of property management statements from people that manage rental properties, real estate agents and that, so that we see the income they receive and we can see some of the deductions. The difficulty is, as you said, well, how do we know what part of the year was it available for rent or actually rented versus the owner using it? So there is self-assessment, right? We've got to rely on some of that. There's other feeds when people say, well, it was empty. Well, if we get the electricity feed and it shows consumption was being up, well, it doesn't look like it's empty, So it's all this new data feed. It's all the ability to use data in a much more proficient way to match and get a better position. It is complex. It's not just the Airbnb, but it's just rental properties generally. There's a lot of income and a lot of expenses that has largely been unassured, and now with us getting the statements from property management agents, we can assure a lot of income and a lot of the deductions that they pay, but we do operate a self-assessment system in Australia.
Thanks. We are getting close to time. A couple more, and our next question is from Miriam Webber.
Thanks, Commissioner. Miriam Webber from the Canberra Times. My question does revisit some of those comments you had about the relationship between consultants and the APS. You've spoken about coming up through the Big Four and that being quite radical, being able to bring a fresh perspective to the APS. Do you have a concern that with the new focus on reducing the reliance on consultants and also addressing conflicts around people moving between the sectors, that there will be a loss of transfer of knowledge between the APS and the private sector?
Look, I think there was, as has been written a number of times, an increase in the use of consultants over the years. There was what was a cap on the number of public servants, ASL, average staffing level, and the coalition government put that in place and said each agency had a level. Now, that pushed people to use outside consultants because they couldn't do it themselves if they didn't have the people, but were asked by government to do things. So there was a growth in that, no doubt, in the world. That is coming off. This government has made it very clear that they would like to see more things brought in-house. We're doing that as much as we can, although we don't use consultants much for just our BAU work. We use them to build new systems, like we've got to put a new thing in place. So we need people to come in and have the expertise to code and do all that. So, as I said, look, there's probably a little bit less interchange in the future. I think there'll always be people that'll move from the private sector to the public to the private. And it's up to the public sector too to make sure we're providing sufficient skills to our own people. I mean, we took on 865 graduates last year, 865. Now, the notion of graduates doing a 3-year course and that's it for life, I think is sort of gone. So we have to make sure, through micro-credentialising or whatever way, is that we can keep their knowledge contemporary. All right? Now, that might well be through universities, who are very much investing. Until recently, I chaired the Business Advisory Committee for the School of Business of the University of New South Wales, and I know this is an enormous investment by them to tailor courses to upskill people for current skill requirements. So people that join the ATO now might have 2 or 3 different skill sets needed in the 20 years or so they spend at the ATO.
And now we have our last question, and it's a very quick one from Finn McHugh.
Well, it's always how long the answer is the problem.
Right.
Finn McHugh at Capital Brief. Thank you for your time. You've described the implications of cybercrime as scary stuff. It keeps you up awake at night. What level of coordination does the ATO have with overseas agencies? Because we know it's an international problem. And what internally is being done to deal with the prospective threat posed by AI?
We've actually initiated and chair a subset of the FTA, the Forum of Tax Administrators, that I chair, JITSI, Joint International Task Force on Shared Intelligence and Collaboration. Right, no one will remember that, but fortunately I just did. That has brought together, it started at 6 countries and now there's 40. Now, out of that, there's a subset called J5, and it's the Five Eyes country, but Netherlands instead of New Zealand. And they work very closely with their own intelligence agencies to disrupt international facilitators of crime. You know, tax evasion, money laundering, you know, people smuggling, guns, human trafficking, and all of that. And we started that off in Australia, the J5. It's been really, really useful. And our representative on it is sitting over there. We've formed a new group called Fraud and Criminal Behaviours. That's the group you don't want to get a business card from, right? That's the hard bit of the ATO. And fortunately, we have worked really well with the Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission, the AFP, more so as well, the ASD now. And overseas, we've worked well with our US counterparts that work with Home Affairs, FBI, etc. We've done joint operations. We've helped in joint disruptions of banks in the Caribbean and other places. So it's been a really interesting thing for me to observe over the years, where we were just seen as tax collectors. You know, we're not going to be a tax collector. And there's a lot more acknowledgement now that the same facilitators that allow hidden money from tax evasion are doing the exact same thing for financing guns, terrorism, drugs, etc. So we're working much more closely with intelligence here in Australia, and the J5 work very closely with their intelligence agencies. And it does touch all those other 4 countries in the J5 have criminal investigation powers. And we had this rather absurd situation where we had to take someone from the Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission to a meeting overseas in their secure facilities, and we couldn't go in because we didn't have those powers. So, you know, that's why I'm calling for that. But it will be something into the future to disrupt the foreign facilitators of criminal activities.
Thank you.
Well, Commissioner, thank you so much for coming back to the National Press Club after 7 years. We wish you all the best in what you do next. I understand that a holiday is going to be somewhere in the future, so all the best for that, and thank you for joining us today. Please thank Commissioner Chris Jordan.